Hello and welcome to this presentation on the WinJS ListView. The WinJS ListView is probably the most common and prolific control in the Windows Store applications. The equivalent of the WinJS ListView in XAML is the grid view. Unlike in XAML where you have a list view and a grid view, list view meaning top to bottom display, and grid view meaning kind of horizontally in the form of columns and cells. In the WinJS ListView, it's a layout type that changes from being a list layout versus a grid layout. So in XAML we have two different controls, list view and grid view, while in WinJS there's just one control that has a layout of either list view or grid view. So I would like to show you some of the functionalities or features of the list view by just showing you the Windows 8 desktop. So in the list view here, you can see that certain items have been grouped in certain ways, and there's the ability to kind of drag, drop, and move things around. This functionality is happening without any actual programming on our parts, meaning even though we have to enable the ability to drag, the animations that take place here is not something you have to program. That sort of comes for free. The other thing is that the list view has the ability to, so as I'm scrolling from left to right here, so let's say I move from the left hand side to the right hand side, as the items that are dropping off on the left hand side here go out of the screen, the list view manages the memory for these applications. In other words, it is releasing the memory allocated to the visual elements, not the actual data, but the visual elements that make up the display. While at the same time, the items that are coming in on the screen on the right hand side, it is sort of drawing them off the screen before you actually see them. So it's optimized in the way that it manages memory and the way it maintains the amount of memory being used in the applications, while at the same time also trying to be as performant as possible by preloading, if you will, the items that are coming in from the right hand side, in this case drawing them off the screen, so by the time you actually scroll, those items are already rendered, and so you don't see the actual drawing take place. Another feature of the list view that we'll be looking at today in this demo is the Semantic Zoom capability. Now the Semantic Zoom works I can use the mouse here, so you can see my mouse going in the bottom here, and I click in here, shows you the sort of zoomed out view of this, and I can just click on a specific group here and it zooms into this group. So I'll zoom out again. This time let me start from the left hand side and let me zoom out now, and I go to the extreme right hand side group here, this one, and I click on here. It'll zoom into that group. The Semantic Zoom also works with the control and the mouse wheel scroll down versus mouse wheel scroll up that zooms in, and also works with the control minus and control plus to zoom in and zoom out. So control minus to zoom out. I can't do that right now because I've got my zoom it running for the presentation mode, and I use the same keyboard shortcuts. So it won't actually work with the Semantic Zoom, but just so you know, the control minus will zoom out, control plus will zoom in, and you can use the mouse scroll wheel as well, so which is what I'm doing here. And if you have a touch monitor, then you're pinching in to zoom out, and you're sort of pinching out, or expanding, if you will, to zoom in. Of course, the functionality comes for free in the sense that we have to build the templates for it, but we don't have to actually do the programming for that to take place. So in today's demo, what we'll be looking at is this list view, and I essentially want to show you some of the things you get for free, making it really simple to start building Windows 8 Store applications and getting some of the functionality that you would expect of Windows Store applications. The next thing we'll be looking at today is the data binding by way of building data templates and modifying templates to get a sense of how this would work in a list view from scratch, as in from the bare bones. And we'll be looking at building templates or defining templates from a declarative standpoint, as in HTML, and also defining templates in code in case we ever have the need to define or use templates from code. So that's pretty much the only slide I have today. And I have another slide here, which is the third slide, which is a bunch of URLs that we'll be looking at during the course of this presentation, wherein some of the templates are highlighted here in these hyperlinks here. I'm actually going to go grab these templates so that you get a sense of where to get the templates from and also how you would use those templates. So there's this hyperlink over here is essentially showing you how you would use the ListView controls or getting started and all the various steps you might have to go through in order to begin to use the ListView control. And over here, this link is showing you the templates for the grid layout, which includes the CSS, if there's any JavaScript, which there isn't in this case, but just the HTML and CSS that will be required. And in the case of the Semantic Zoom, the template we'll use for the Semantic Zoom capabilities. So let's get started with some code. So what we have is I'm going to start with a brand new application, blank application. So start with JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick Windows Store application, and then once I pick on the Windows Store application, I'll pick a blank application, which is this guy here, right? So let me pick a blank application. Now sadly, even though it says blank application, as you will see, it's not necessarily blank. So you can see the JavaScript file here, it's not quite blank. So I guess they didn't mean blank when they said blank application. Actually, it's required. You would need that JavaScript. I'm starting from a clean slate, so I'm going to clear up everything that's there. So I'm going to take the CSS file and have that cleaned up as well, and then the HTML file, which is default HTML. I won't clean this up completely, but I'll clean up just the body part here. Okay, so to start with, we're going to define our list view, and like with everything else in most controls, including in jQuery, the control itself is just a standard HTML element, and in this case we're going to use the data.win.control attribute to pick or define this div to be a specific element, and we'll pick the list view. Now once we have a list view, you need to tell the list view the data source that it is going to get, or where is it going to get its data from. So the way you define that is you define the data.win.options attribute, and in there you define, so I'm going to define a item data source attribute, and I need to define this or set this to something. So let's look at how we go about doing that. So of course, first we need to have our data. So let's go into our JavaScript application and get a hold of some data. So we go into our JavaScript WinJS file. So this JavaScript is blank, so I'm going to first start by defining our anonymous function. As you know, this the sort of what we should be doing here in with JavaScript these days, especially in the Windows 8 applications. And this is a self-executing JavaScript function. I'm going to define a variable for our application, which is nothing but WinJS.application, and then to the application I'm going to hook into the onActivated event, which will be just another function, JavaScript function. And once I've hooked into all the events that I would like to hook into, I can then start my application. So that's the sort of the bare bones, if you will. So in order to get our data, I actually have a function. This, if you remember, or if you've seen any of the previous presentations, you'll notice that we actually had already done this, which is a function that downloads information, data, in this case the movies. It's the same data really, but I'm starting this from scratch. So this function download data async is going to return to us a collection or an array of items that is nothing but the movies data set, if you will, that we've been working with over the last few presentations. And all I'm doing here is, besides getting the movies by parsing JSON, these movies have their properties in Pascal cased, and so what I'm doing is I'm iterating over the movies and I'm assigning to an items array, which is another array, and I'm just redefining the properties to be camel cased. So the item dot Pascal case title is assigned to a property which is in JavaScript form or in camel cased, and that's what I'm doing over here. So by the time this movie, this download async promise returns, is returning a bunch of items. Now what we need to do here is we need to call this method. So let's call this download data async, and this download data async is returning a promise, as you can see from here. And so we do then, and in this we have another function that returns the items, so we can now have access to these items. So once we have these items, we would need to assign them, or would like to assign them, to our list view. So I'm just going to have another function here in JavaScript assigned to list view and sending it these items that we received. So let's define this JavaScript function as well, getting the items. Okay. Now, as you know, because this entire thing is in an anonymous function, we are not going to get access to this, any information, any variables or functions defined in here from within our HTML file. So how would I assign a data source here if I'm going to get my data from my JavaScript file, but this is all within an anonymous, self-executing anonymous function? I need to somehow make variables or functions or something available from outside of this function so I can access it from the HTML file. So the way we do that is in WinJS we define a namespace, and within the namespace we define what do we need: classes, functions, variables, and then we can access these variables from by referencing the namespace. So I'm going to do winjs.namespace.define. I'm going to call this matlist.data, and within this namespace define something here. Okay, so what I'm going to call this is items binding list. For now I'm just going to define this as undefined. So this items binding list is just essentially the data source, if you will, that we want to define or assign to our list view. So in here, this items, the items, remember, is an array. It's a standard JavaScript array, but what the list view requires is a binding or a bindable list. And in WinJS they have such a thing. They have a winjs.binding.list, which is, think of this list as an observable list, as in it's kind of like similar to notify property change interface, or a collection that implements that interface to allow for this two-way binding scenario, where if the data changes, the UI reflects the change, and if the UI modifies the data, then it's reflected in the original collection or data source. So the winjs.binding.list is one such object that takes in the array, in this case the items, and gives to us a bindable list. And so I'm going to assign this bindable list to our matlist.data.items binding list. Okay. Now once this binding list has been assigned here, it is a bindable list, and we can now bind this to our list view. So in the list view I'm going to assign this, sorry, I kind of have to reference the no code completion here. So matlist.data.items binding list dot data source is the real property. So the binding list, of course, is just a list, but the data source property of the binding list is what we need to assign to the data source, item data source property of this list view. So if everything works, has been programmed correctly, what we should have here is we call download data async. We assign this to the list view, which essentially is not assigning to the list view, but it's just assigning to the items binding list property here, which is part of this namespace. And then we need to get the runtime to process these controls. So we have to call, if you recall from our previous presentation, we have to call WinJS.UI.processAll for that list view in our HTML page, this guy here, to be processed. What it really means is it finds all controls and all the elements that have data.win.control, figures out what control this is, instantiates or initializes this control, and processes, in this case, the options, if you will. So essentially we'll have a list view that's been instantiated, and the list view's item data source would have been defined, and we should see data in our list view. That's the plan. Or if everything works, that's the plan. So let's see what happens if we run this application now. So we have an error, and this error is saying that unable to get property data source of undefined or null reference. So I see one of the things that I should have explained to you here also, or not explained but shown you, is that we should set the JavaScript runtime exceptions checkbox here. That is, we should break on thrown exceptions, JavaScript exceptions. Actually, let me show you where you get this from, this dialog. You get it from debug exceptions. I mean, to turn on to throw JavaScript exceptions at the point at which they happen. So rather than landing up here in the base JS application JavaScript file just before termination, we have no real idea as to what happened or where exactly the exception happened. So we do get the information, but it doesn't stop at where it happened. So by checking that checkbox, maybe the experience will be slightly better. So now you can see that it's throwing the exception sort of where it happens rather than at the tail end, because the exception was not handled earlier. So this is a slightly better experience than before, and actually it certainly does help in real world scenarios where you're debugging JavaScript. So make sure you turn on that setting in your debugger. Okay, so now let's look at the actual error here. As we saw, I forgot the error now. It's unable to get the data source property undefined. So in other words, it looks like this guy here, this thing has been undefined. So let's see if it comes in here before it processes the controls. So it comes in there. This items is assigned, and then it comes in there, then does a process all, and at that point it breaks here. So it's probable that there's a typo in our HTML. Let's check that out. Oh, actually, you know what? Yeah, I didn't create an instance of. So we need a new instance. We need an instance of binding list, not just the binding list. So let's run that again, and let's see what happens. We move this breakpoint. Okay, that's good. So this is what I was expecting, and it might look a little weird, but essentially what we've done is we've taken the data and we bound it to the list view, because we haven't defined templates, so it's not going to look pretty. It's just basically doing a toString on every on the data element. In this case, it's not actually trying to display it in any form or fashion. So our next steps or the next bit of effort that we have to put in here is to display this or define a template. So let's start defining templates here. So going on to the HTML page. So what I want to do is define a template for a singular item. So the way that works is, again, you do a data.win.control. In this case, instead of ListView, you pick template. And in this template, you're saying, okay, well, for every item, let's say I want to define the title of the movie in an H2. So I want the title to come over here, and let's say I want an image tag in this template where the image of the movie should come over here. So that's the plan. So the way you define that, the way you bind it, you do a data.win.bind, and what you say here is we want the text content of this h2 to be nothing but the title of our data source, so the singular item. If you remember, our data source has, if for every item in the array, the title is a single property for one of those items. So I want to assign the title property of a single item to the h2 tag for that specific item. This is an item template. So what that means is that for each item, it's going to use this template. So we've got the title there, and now as we do the same for the image, data.win.bind, data-win.bind, and what we want to bind is the source attribute of the image to the image URL property of the item, the data item, if you will. And if you have multiple properties you need to set, for example, let's say alt, then we put we separate with a semicolon, and we can define alt, and that would be, let's say, the title. So the alt attribute of the image would be assigned to the title property, the image URL would be assigned to the source property, and the text content or inner HTML. Text content is a new attribute on HTML tags. I think it was introduced in HTML4. It kind of normalizes the so rather than knowing inner HTML or text or value or inner text properties different that the different HTML elements support, text content kind of normalizes that, and you just have to remember the text content property, and it'll do the needful, if you will. So now that we define our template, we have to tell our the ListView control its item template is what. And so the way you define that is you use CSS selectors, and in the CSS selector you could say the selector is, now we need to define an ID here, so let's define this as an ID. Let's call this item template div. That's the ID, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say the item template of this list view is the CSS selector hash item template div. In other words, the element that has the ID of item template div. So now we have a data source, we have an item template. Let's see if that how that looks. So this looks a lot better. Of course, you can see the images are showing up here. Of course, things are not working out correctly, but the idea is that the item template we can clean it up and we can start seeing things a little better. But rather than do this manually, what I wanted to show you is some of the templates that are available to us from the MSDN website. So we're going to just pull some templates from there and work with that. So that way you're not having to do this all by hand, because that's the whole idea. The idea is that you can have some default templates that are available to you, and they're a really good start for your application. You can always tweak them later. So as you can see here, I'm just going to copy you don't see this on my screen, but I'm going to copy the URL. So on this website here, I'm going to it's an MSDN website. I'm going to pick the album overlay template. And so the first thing you see here is not the first thing, but one of the things you see here is the list view. So I'm going to copy the HTML for the list view. I'm going to override it with our list view here, so that what we have is a list view here called image overlay album, and it's defined as a data.window control of list view, and its items options here. We'll have to change this back to our data source. Let me also go grab the the CSS, which is the template. So instead of having this template, we're going to use the template that we found in there. clean that up also a little bit. So our data source here is matlas.data.items binding list. Data source, and the item template is this guy now. And in the item template, our h2 is these are older templates. Make this title, and this what we have another data element in our property in our items is the year of the movie in this case. So if we go back to our WinJS files, the JS file, you'll see we have a year property for each of our items. And the image URL is the same, so the image has the same, luckily the same property. So here's our template now. This template is we copy pasted from the MSDN site and the list view as well. This layout, as I said right in the beginning, the list view has an option of list layout or grid layout is just a property on the list, unlike in XAML where the controls are two different controls. So now let's see what this looks like. Okay, there's no CSS. Let's go grab the CSS as well. So I'm just going to copy the entire CSS here and go into our CSS file and paste it in. So that's our CSS. Okay, let's run this and see what happens. Another typo somewhere. Actually, I didn't see the error, but let's see if I can just determine the, because we've done this before. This case. This is JavaScript, so it is case sensitive. Okay, so we have a much better looking bunch of movies here, because there's a few problems. One is this is not sort of utilizing the entire size dimensions of my screen, and two, these images are a bit squished, as in they're sort of compressed from the top and bottom. So let's fix those two things. So in order to get the list view to be the entire size of the screen, we take the list view and CSS, we just say width is 100% and height also is 100%. And for the images, the images here are 220 pixels and 326 pixels height, and that should fix our issues. And there you go. So it's a much better looking list view. Of course, so you can see by default we have the selection. As I'm hover over each of them, the selection gets highlighted. It's not, I'm not selecting, but it's just the hover kind of is getting highlighted. I could right click to pick the images, the ones I want. Nothing's really happening, but all of the functionality is coming to us free and out of the box, if you will, since as you know, we had not done anything to program this thing. Okay, so now we need to fix some of the other features or add on more functionality. So if you notice here, let me just rerun this again. The images are in no particular order in terms of the year. This 1997, 1999 to 2013, and so on, 1941. So what I would like to do is now order all of the items, the movies in this case, by year. So first the older movies first and the later movies last. Let's see what it will take to do that. So in our JavaScript file, when we assign this binding list, we when we create this new instance here, we have the option to do a create sorted. And in this create sorted, it takes, this is very similar to any other sort of sorting function, which is nothing but a callback function that provides two parameters, which is essentially one item and a second item, and then you return a -1, 0, or 1 depending on whether it's less than. If x in this case is greater than y, then you return a 1. If x is less than y, you return a -1. If x is equal to y, you return 0. So we could do return, and we're going to sort this by year, so x dot year minus y dot year, and that should sort our movies by year. So let's make sure that is happening. So there you go. 1941 is the first movie we have, and as you scroll to the right here, these are all the 2013 movies. So it orders them vertically, so 1941, 1971, 1977, 1980, and so on. So it kind of goes like this, and then to the right. So you got a movie sorted, and that's good. But how about if you wanted to group these movies by genre? So you have action movies, science fiction movies, drama movies, and so on. So let's look at doing that next. So what we need to do is now, so this the beauty of the binding list that they provide in the WinJS library is that you can just keep adding on functionality without having the data source supporting it. So in this case, our data source is just a simple an array, if you will, but it's the UI, if you will, that's doing the sorting, the grouping, and things of that nature. And it's all being assigned to the same binding list, if you will. So the binding list, in this case, the sorted is, of course, that's how the binding list is. But when you do the grouping here, you'll see what happens once we do that. I'll explain what I mean after we finish this. So we do a create grouped. The create group takes primarily 3 functions: the group key function, the group data function, and then the group sorter function. So let's look at what it would mean to implement this. So the group key function over here, so let me function takes an item, and in this item we can just return this is the key. So the key in this case is our item.category property, right? So that's the first function. Now let me just call this group key, so you know what that is. So that's the group key function. Essentially what we're saying is what is the key for your grouping. In our case, we know that the category property that we have is the genres, the science fiction, the drama, action, etc. So we want to group by the category. So that's the group key function. The next function is the group data function, and we'll revisit this group data function in a bit, but for now just understand it to be the data that you might want associated to your grouping. So when you have a grouping in the list view, and you might want to access some data from that grouping, what this function has to return is what are we returning? What is the data associated to the group itself? So we can reference it later on. So I'm just going to call this title, and the title is nothing but item dot title. So now it might be a little confusing here, but we'll revisit this later on in this presentation. So you'll get a better sense of what I mean by that. And when we access this, you'll get a better sense of it also. The third function is a group sorter. So group sorter, and this group sorter takes 2 items. So let's call this first and last. It's kind of like the sorting function here. It takes the 2 items, and we're going to do the same thing, except what I want to do here, I want to sort the groups by alpha, meaning action should come before science fiction, or action should come before drama should come before science fiction. So the sorting is done by alpha of the genre name, right? So we want to return a first dot char code at 0 minus last dot char code at 0. Okay, and that's that. So that takes care of the grouping function. Now that we have a grouping, we haven't told the list view here exactly what we wanted. So let's look at what we need to do in the list view. So we have an item data source, but we don't have a group data source. So let's define a group data source for our, so in this case, it'll be group data source. And the group data source is going to be, look at what's happened over here. We've assigned it to the items binding list. And the items binding list is a thing, is an object. Besides it being in an observable an array kind of object, it has multiple properties on it. Of course, in this case, you can see that for the items, the data source property is what we have assigned to the data source here. For the groups then, because now that we have defined groups in here, we've done created grouped, right? We can simply define the same, not the same, but similar. So it is matList.data.items-binding-list.groups.data source. So it's the data source that pertains to groups. Think of the binding list as this object here, this binding list object, as a, or the groups and the sorted as projections over an existing list. So it's an existing array, and the grouping is nothing but another view of the same information. So it's not like there's two different arrays, if you will. It's just the same array, but there's just a view or a projection on top of that. Now you could assign two completely different collections to this, but then it becomes difficult to not difficult, you have to do the work of sort of mapping. So if I have a bunch of, let's say, action group, then which are the movies that pertain to action? We have to define that in this array and sort of map it back to the items that are part of the item data source, not just the group data source. So this binding list makes it really simple, because you're creating in this case a projection over the existing items, and it's doing all the mapping behind the scenes for you. So you just need to say, this is my grouped items, and this is my items, and the list view will handle the rest. So now we define the groups, the group data source. We haven't yet defined a template. So if I run this right now, you're not going to see any difference. Well, you'll see an error which says cannot assign the function result. Okay, so right. Okay, so let's. So this is not equal. This is minus. So essentially, you get the result of these two, and it'll sort it by alpha order. Let's run that. Oh, more errors here. Oh, it doesn't have the item template. Okay, so there's just an error in the HTML here. Comma. Okay, so what you see is grouping it, except that the title is kind of weird here, but it has broken down the movies by the different genres. So this big block of movies here is science fiction. This is a thriller. So you can see it's well, you can't see the thing here. So that actually shows me that we made another mistake here. The group title should not be the items title, it should be the category, if you will. So that's another error, we need to fix that. But what it's doing now is, because we haven't defined a template, it's taking the data. Remember that item group data is taking the data and just kind of doing a toString on it, if you will. So just displaying the data without any template, because we haven't defined one, and it doesn't know what to display. So it's taking the entire object and sort of pasting it into this into the place here. So you're seeing this, the sort of the toString representation of an object. So let's fix the two things. One is define a template, and then make sure this shows this as I think it's action rather than the name of the movie here. Okay, so first in our JavaScript file over here, instead of the title being item.title, it should be title item.category. Since they were grouping by the category, we want the group data to contain the category in there, but as a title property. And then our HTML template, that's the HTML page, we define a template. So let's have this as a div. Let's give this an ID. Call it group header template, and data.win.control of item template, and here we could have h1 that has a data.win.bind, and we're going to do to the text content content property the title property, remember. So, and then in here group header template, we assign the CSS selector for group header template, this guy, the element that has the ID of group header template, right? So that takes care of that. Let's see how this works now. Okay, much better. So we have an H1 header action, the bunch of movies that make up action, animation, bunch of movies, in this case just one, drama, a bunch of movies that make up drama, and so on. Musical, science fiction, and thriller. Okay, so far this looks pretty cool. We have actually achieved the one part of our demo, which is defining a list view using templates, CSS, JavaScript, defining item source, data source, item data source, group data source, defining a grouping, and kind of making the list view look the way we would like in terms of the grouping. So this in fact is this is exactly what we had in our previous demo. We got to the point, I didn't show you the whole thing, but essentially this is now back to square one, which is this is where we were at last time. I know I should explain all the list view parts then, because we were looking more at the promises and WinJS stuff, but now we're looking at the list view side of things. And the next step is now to implement the semantic zoom, and then we will implement after that a template in code rather than in HTML. So let's look at doing that in the next. Okay, so the way the semantic zoom works is actually pretty cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to define another list view that has, well, it doesn't have anything. I just want to define another list view, and this list view is going to have let's not give it a name for now, but I want to just show you the concept of how that works. I'm going to hide this list view or comment this list view out, so it's not in play. And what I want to do is if you imagine the zoomed out view of our current data source should be the genres, right? The action, the drama, the science fiction. And so the data source for this list view, I'd actually like it to be the same one that we use for this guy, for the group data source. So our data source for the items is nothing but the data source for the groups, because then there won't be any grouped header and so on. And the item template, let's use for now the item template as something else, but I'm just going to use this for now, just so you get a sense of how this is going to look. Okay, so here's a bunch of, this is, you know, if we could style this properly and kind of bring it more to the center of the page, this would look like the semantic zoom's zoomed out view of our genres. So that's the idea. What I want to do is now build out a list view and its appropriate template and the CSS files that look like what we would like it to be in the zoomed out view. So we're not looking at the zoomed in view version right now. We're looking at only the zoomed out view. And once we have this working, we can uncomment out the other list view and then see what we can do to make this semantic zoom part work. So that's the plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my presentation, which had the URL for the template we want to use. So in this case, the list view is that, and we're just going to copy this list view here, the HTML, clean up the layout of this HTML a bit, and of course to our item data source we'll include the groups.data source as our items, and we need this template that's also in our thing here. So let's define the template here. And the text content in this case will be title. So remember, this is our grouping thing. So the group data source has a title property. If you remember, that's the genre, if you will, the category, and we're going to assign that to the h2 here. And let's take the CSS that we have in the same template. Okay, and on the top of all this, let's paste the CSS in. Okay, so let's run this and see what it looks like for now. Okay, so that's a lot better. I don't like the color blue, but if you can imagine it looks a lot better. So let's just clean up the color, and we can say, well, actually, you know what? Let's add a thumbnail of the representation of that image, or one of the movies from each of the categories here. So let's say the first one. So let's do the two things. We'll first clean up the color, and then we'll look at making the template a bit better. So the color, which is the semantic zoom, but let's see what is the semantic zoom. Yeah, so that's the one. So let's look at this color, semantic zoom here, and let's make this just 45, 45, 45, which is just a gray. Well, I guess it's black. It's looking like it's black here for some reason. It's supposed to be gray. Maybe that's my screen, but that's a black. Sorry, that's a gray. Okay, so once we have a gray here, what I want to do is define, make the box in such a way that's got an image in there. So let's change the template to include an image that has a data.win.bind, whose source property is nothing but image URL. Now, of course, if you remember, and we can also do the same thing here for alt, that is the title. So now we're going to go to our default JS file, and remember this group data. Currently we just returning the title property, or not return, we have an object that has a title property. We now want to add to that an image URL property that is nothing but the item.image URL property. Okay, so now I think you'll get a better sense of what are we doing in this function here. This group data function is returning an object that has a bunch of properties that we will have access to when we are working with our grouped data source. So in this case, the two properties, title and image URL, are coming from this group data object. Okay, let's see what that looks like here. Well, of course the image is working, but we need to size it or do something with this image over here. So let's make the images smaller, and we need to expand the using CSS, expand the the size of these guys, the semantic zoom probably. So the semantic zoom here should be, let's say, 100 pixels. Actually, we also need to size the image. This should be probably like 108 pixels, and in our template we need to also define the style of the image to have a width of 100 pixels. Let's see if that makes it any better. Okay, looks a little better. Probably need to make the height a little bit more so you can see the entire picture here, image I mean. So let's go back into our CSS and let's make it 180. Okay, that looks fine so far. They're not all the same image sizes, so for the most part it all fits in. So here we have a sort of zoomed out view of our list view, and the idea is that this should be the zoomed out view, and the other view that we had was the zoomed in view. And so when we do a semantic zoom out, we see this. We should be able to click on one of these items to zoom into that specific view, right? So if this look and feel is good for us, then we now need to combine the two list views to make this whole semantic zoom thing function. So let's see what it takes to do that. Okay, so Now the semantic zoom control is another control. So we add a new control, data-win-control. In this case, it's not a list view or a template, but it's another control called semantic zoom. And the beauty of this is that the semantic zoom control, of course, you can imagine it's got a bunch of properties that it will need to be defined or assigned here. But the semantic zoom control just handles the whole thing for us. So all we've done is we've taken the two list views and we wrap them around with another control, the semantic zoom control. We've not set up properties. We've done nothing of this kind. And what it does is, or it assumes, is that the first list view it finds within itself is the sort of the zoomed in view, and the second list view is the zoomed out view. So, and we already have that. So now let's see how this works. So we're seeing the original. Oh, we didn't define the height for this. These semantic zoom controls. So let's go and define the height in this. So the semantic zoom control needs to be given a ID so we can reference it. Control semantics. Okay, and then our CSS, we can just do that. Actually, what we didn't do is we should probably also do that for our this guy. So this should all be 100%. Okay, now let's see what it looks like. Okay, so this looks like nothing has changed except we now have the semantic zoom control feature here. So when I click on this with the mouse, and of course this works with the keyboard, touch, and everything else, and keyboard mouse combinations as well, as we talked about right in the beginning. But I'm just going to zoom out, and you can see, of course, if there are more items here, and you may not want this as 100% like I did. Maybe you want this a bit squished in. Maybe it should be 50% or something height, and kind of let it scroll horizontally. So let's go fix that just to get a sense of how that works here. So in the CSS, this guy should not be part of this thing here, but we could probably do that over here. Actually, it's got the calculations happening over here, so well, let's just leave it as this for now, and let's see. So I'm going to zoom out once again, and yeah, well, so anyway, the idea is that when I click on this now, let's click on drama, and we go into just the drama part. So let's say I start from action and I zoom out, and then I go into musical, right? So when it takes me in, it's taken me into the musical. It's scrolled and it's done all the stuff for us. So from here, it's scrolled all the way to here, and it's zoomed in over there. So let's zoom out again and click on science fiction. It comes to science fiction. Zoom out again, go into thriller. Now, of course, it can't scroll any further in thriller since that's the end of the scroll. So it's not going to go any more beyond that. But if I go into action, it then oh, that's the other thing we probably want to fix here is what does it mean to multi-select, if you will, or select. What does it mean to select something in a zoomed out view? So we probably want to disable the selection capability in list views. But let me just zoom in here, come straight to action. So let's fix the selection piece. That gives me the opportunity to talk about some of the properties for list view controls. So in our HTML, so one of the properties the list view has is selection mode, and the selection mode could be, by default, is multi. As you saw, we could multi-select. You could have a none, and you could have a single. So in this case, well, in our zoomed out, we want to make it as none, as in there's no point allowing for selection. While in this view, the zoomed in version, we might say, well, we don't want multi-select, we just want single select. So I'll just set this up as well while we're here. Selection mode of single. So by default, as I said, is multi, like that. Single. Okay. whoops. Oh. Yeah, you always need to make sure you end up with the right JavaScript. This is not right. That's why I like to order it like this so I can tell. Okay, that should fix that. So we can't multi-select. You can see the selection moves from as I click. I can't have two selected. And when we zoom out, when I try and click here, I can't. There's no real effect to clicking. So I'm clicking, but there's no real effect. So what we've seen in this demo is we've looked at defining a list view from scratch, templates, item templates, group templates, sorting data sources, grouping data sources, defining the group data for the grouped data source, and then eventually implementing a semantic zoom control with the two list views and assigning different data sources for each of the list views. In the case of the zoomed out list view, this is the grouped data source. We've also modified the template here to include images and things. And now finally, the last bit of piece that we need to look at or want to look at is the defining a template in code, sort of by hand, if you will, rather than declaratively. We want to do this in code. And the question is, why would he do that? Why would he want to do that? Because there's a few scenarios that come to mind. One is, let's say programmatically at runtime, you want to define or decide to use template A or template B based on some data criteria. So it's not something you can do declaratively, because declarative means it's kind of fixed in stone, but you want to define things at runtime, or maybe the template itself. So it's not like you're swapping to choose to use template A or template B, but the template, if you will, just changes internally based on some data or criteria that you might have at runtime. So that's one of the reasons that you might want to define templates at runtime, or sorry, in code rather than declaratively. And in some cases, it could be that you have a third-party vendor that gives you a template in the form of a code, class, and so have no choice but to assign the templates by code. So let's look at doing that now next. Okay, so in order to define a template for a certain control in code, we first need a reference to that control. So once this WinJS.UI.processHall has finished, we can then reference that control, all of the controls that have been processed in code. Because the process all is a promise. So what we want to do, process all, we want to do a then and pass in a callback. I'm not sure what it returns in here, but we're not interested in what's coming in as a parameter. But we want to be able to define some code after it has finished processing all. So let's define a variable called ListView, which is nothing but our document.getElement by ID, the ID of our ListView dot win control. If you remember from our previous session, the win control is like a back reference that essentially allows us to look at the standard DOM element in the form of as a control, as a win control, WinJS control. So the .win control gives us sort of a reference, if you will, to the actual JavaScript control that's been defined as a back reference. So let's get the where's our template? Oh, here it is. I can't see that. The list view, I mean. So that's the list view we want. So now to this list view, we want to be able to assign an item template in code. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, so item template. And this item template, of course, needs to be some sort of object or something that a function that returns to us a template. And so the way we can do this is in this namespace. Let's define another function. Let's actually call this matlist.data.item template generator. Okay, so our template is a function that's going to be defined in this namespace here called item template generator. So in our function here, in this namespace, let's define a function. Now this function takes an item promise. Item promise is what's being passed into us. It's a promise, and it's a promise that contains an item. Okay, that's how you want to see this. So that's our promise. Now this function, the item promise, the point is that the item promise has an item in it, but because it's a promise, we need to return the template, and so we say return item promise dot then, and it gives to us the item. Okay, so now this item it should be function that takes in an item. Okay, so this item is not necessarily it's not the actual item, but it's something that has access or gives us access to item by form of a .data property. So the data property is the singular item, if you will, and the point of this function is to return a template. So imagine we had, let's say, a div here, and we say document create element div, and in that div you want to add an image. In the div in that div you want to add an h2. We want to assign all the properties and kind of come back with a template. In other words, what we're doing is we are building, imagine this thing. So this div is the one I just created, and we want to define a class in here to the div, which will have the same CSS class in there. Then we want to add an image that's a child of this div. I'm going to assign the class to it, and the source also will be item.data.image URL, right? So what you want to do in code is make all those assignments there. So rather than do all of this by hand, I actually have the code pre-created, so you don't want to watch me do this. But at the end of all of this, you want to do a return this div, right? That's the idea. So you build up the div, and then you return the div. So here we're going to just paste this in. So I created the div, and then I've set the attributes and things. And in this case, the image source is item.data.image URL. The alt is item.data.title, and so on. And you append the child and so on. So you're just building up in code in JavaScript the HTML DOM elements that are a child of each other. So in this case, the div is sort of the outermost div. That's the one that's being returned over here, and what we assign to our item ListView here, item template, is the return of this function, right? So we're building up the code, the function in code, and we're returning it over here. Okay, so not liking something here. I don't know why it keeps. Okay. This div. Okay. Run again. Okay, so that doesn't look right. What's happened is I've not actually removed the element template item template from the declarative syntax. So let's clean that up also. So for the same item list view, we're going to remove this guy here. So now I should use our other template. Oops, that's not what I wanted either, but let's make sure I didn't make any typos. Over there. Of course, again, I don't know why I made that mistake, but it's JavaScript, and It's camel cased. Okay, so it's a similar looking template, and I intentionally made it similar looking yet slightly different, so we can recognize that this template is coming from code versus the other, while the other template was coming from declarative syntax. And the reason that I can tell is that when I made this template in code, I intentionally sized the images. So if I remove these 2 lines of code here, or comment it out, you'll see that the images go back to their size as per the CSS. So we're back to the original size. The semantic zoom and everything still works. So I zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, zoom in. That part still works. Just the template is coming from code. So this brings us to the end of this presentation, where we have looked at working with the list view in quite a bit of detail, implementing semantic zoom, implementing templates in in JavaScript, as well as declarative, defining some other control properties such as multi-select or single select or none. And so I hope this presentation has been helpful in introducing to you the ListView control and showing you how easily you could start using the ListView control in your own Windows Store applications. And until next time, have fun and thank you.